Welcome to The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you with us. October the 11th, 1985 was a sunny day in Santa Ana, California, as Alex Odeh opened the door to the offices of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. A bomb exploded. 2 hours later, Alex Odeh was dead. His killers have never been brought to justice. He was only 41 and was going to speak that night at a Reform synagogue in his tireless work for a Palestinian state and to build a Palestinian-Jewish alliance in the United States to end the occupation. The light is shining again on that murder. One of our guests today, David Sheen, wrote this piece you see on The Intercept. As the title says, it's been almost 4 decades, and still we have not seen any justice. And 2 men now, the alleged terrorists who are the key suspects in the assassination of Alex Odeh, are living as free men in Israel, in the occupied territories, and a part of the extremist and racist movement founded by Rabbi Meir Kahane. Will there ever be justice? Will it come that day? We'll find out. Maybe we will. We welcome David Sheen, independent journalist born in Canada, now reporting from Israel-Palestine. His work covers a wide spectrum of local, regional, and international issues on racial tensions and religious extremism. In 2017, David Sheen was named a human rights defender by the Frontline Defenders and wrote the article we're talking about today, shedding the light of day on this murder. And Abed Ayub joins us. He's the legal and policy director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, which is the organization that Alex Odeh helped lead before he was assassinated. And gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having us.
So David, talk about this work you've done to unearth what's been happening and who these 2 men are that are the main suspects, Baruch Ben Yosef and Israel Fuchs.
Mm-hmm. Well, it all started actually about a year ago. At that time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, coming up on the elections, he realized that, the noose was tightening. He's being investigated and now charged with criminal charges of corruption. So how he going to ensure that he continues to serve into the next decade as prime minister? He realized he needs every last right-wing vote, even the most extreme right-wing votes. And so he was determined to bring into his governing coalition the Jewish Power Party. Now, this is the party that is the sequel to the party of Meir Kahane. As you mentioned earlier, this arch-racist rabbi, he's now dead, he was assassinated in 1990, but he really changed Israeli society by making it okay, or breaking that taboo on being unabashedly racist. That you could call for the expulsion of Palestinians, call for ethnic cleansing, and do so without being embarrassed about it. That was the change that he had on Israeli society. Now, when this happened, when Netanyahu crossed this red line and he started to mainstream these ultra-racists, I realized we really need to take stock of ourselves. We need to understand how deep the rot goes. So, of course, I've reported on this racist movement for the last decade, but I didn't really know the backstory. I figured we need to know the entire story. Kahane, after all, was born in the US. He started in the US. That's where he began his supremacist activities in the streets of New York City. And so I started researching stories in the 60s, 70s, 80s, mainly the work of Robert Friedman, who wrote for the Village Voice and Los Angeles Times. In any case, he authored a biography of Kahane called False Prophet. And in that book, he describes Kahane's exploits. At the end of this process of research, I thought, well, what happened to these people? All the people that were like Kahane's right-hand men, the people who helped him implement his, racist policies. And, turns out no small number of them actually went on to later successes in life, but leaving for last the ones who allegedly committed murders. What happened to them? And just doing some Google searches without, any superpowers or anything, I was able to find pretty quickly that these men still live in Israel. They fled to Israel. They've been living here ever since, and without any repercussions. And as I later found out, they've been actually living prominent lives. They've actually been active in Israeli politics, if you can imagine that. And here we are 35 years later. And even though the FBI says they are the top suspects in the murder of Alex Odeh, there have been no efforts on the Israeli side to ensure that they have to answer for these accused crimes.
So, but let me bring you into the conversation here. And Alex O'Day ran the regional office in Southern California when he was murdered, when he was assassinated. So, talk a bit about the conversations that you all are having and what has been going on since that time. As I said to you both earlier before I went on, I knew Alex O'Day. We worked, I met him 3 times in our efforts to end the occupation in different movements when I was working with Peace Now here in the United States. And so talk to us a bit about what you all have been doing.
Right. Thank you, and thank you for covering this important topic. Look, from the moment that bomb exploded and Alex was assassinated, this has been a top priority for the ADC family and the community. There has not been a day that's gone by where we haven't done what we can and try to bring justice for Alex and the family. That includes pressuring law enforcement, putting information out there, trying to work with coalition partners and raising awareness of this, of the case. But as you can imagine, we've run into a lot of roadblocks. We run into a U.S. government that's not willing, for some reason, to move on at least officially naming the suspects publicly, to move on questioning individuals that are already in detention here in the U.S. About the murder and charging them when we know these individuals have and did play a role in the murder of Alex. There was a dull period of for a few years that have passed, but thanks to David's article and bringing to light all this information, we feel there's hope again. We feel that there is enough information out there that's been brought forth to move on apprehending these individuals, naming these individuals as the suspects, and bringing justice to the family. But it has been a challenge. I mean, we are up against a lot of political roadblocks. We're up against administrations, both Republican and Democrat in the U.S., that did not move on this case for one reason or another. And there's the international foreign policy at play as well, with the relationship between U.S. and the state of Israel and how that comes into play when trying to bring the murderers of a U.S. citizen to justice. So it has been challenging over the past 35 years, but we have not been, letting up, and we'll continue pushing as hard as we can.
So one of the things that you quoted in the article, David, there was a quote you have here from one of the investigators that didn't want to they were anonymous, they didn't want to get their names, but he said, the quote was, as we can see here, it's an open case. We had lots of open murder cases and stuff, but this one was frustrating because we had named suspects. And Odeh's case was more than a decade old. He was talking to and was talking about he said, he was quoted saying, we know who did it, we know where they lived, we know how they did it, and we know why they did it. So the evidence is there that these 2 men that we're talking about here, Baruch Ben Yosef, who leads an organization now, as you wrote about, in Israel, to take over the dome and turn it back into a Jewish temple from 2,000 years ago, and Israel Fuchs, these 2 men who were named. And so why is there such difficulty in pursuing this case when we know what we know?
Okay, well, first of all, for someone to face justice, there needs to be an indictment, and then after that, there needs to be an extradition order. But even before that, when 2 countries who are allegedly very close allies, like the US and Israel, when one country wants information from the law enforcement agency of another country just has to ask. And then, allegedly there is, intense cooperation between those law enforcement agencies from the respective countries. But that's not the case. That's not what's happened here. Why hasn't there been? Well, I can reveal that, Israel, its policy is not to give information on Jewish suspects to the law enforcement agencies of other countries. So, for example, in 1978, a few years before Alex's assassination, Israel changed its law. And it's specifically, if you read the documentation, the discussion in the Knesset, the head of the committee passing the law, he said very, very outright, we need for this to be the wording, because remember, a few years ago, there was another follower of Kahana, Jerome Zeller. He was another American Jew. He was responsible for a murder in the United States in New York City, the murder of Iris Konis, and he fled to Israel. And at that time, US did ask for his extradition. And then the Israeli government actually changed the law around extradition. And in the debate in the Knesset, they say, well, we don't want any more cases like Zeller, where someone like him, a Kahanist killer, can come and, be, at least for there to be a request for his extradition. We want to prevent that from happening. So they actually changed the law. And I've spoken to legal officials in Israel and law enforcement officials who say that's the policy. We don't cooperate with, other countries when we get requests like this.
One of the things I want to, before I go back to Abed, in time that we have, both these men, Baruch Ben Yosef and Israel Fuchs, have been arrested in Israel. Baruch Ben Yosef was detained. This is him, by the way. Let me just show you a quick clip of him.
Matters of government, matters related to the ascent to Har Bayit, to the Temple Mount by women. And later on, we have our general meeting inside the Great Synagogue. And there we'll hear more lectures and hear some music related to the temple. And then have the temple meal, what we call the Seudat HaMikdash. This is all in order to raise the awareness to the Temple Mount, and the importance of it to the Jewish people.
That's one of the men we're talking about. And he was detained with Kahani, as you write about, in the threat to blow up the dome of the mosque. And then Israel Fuchs was opened fire on a Palestinian family because they splashed mud on him. And he then was sentenced to jail in Israel and sent back to the United States and then went back to Israel. And so these are not, these men are known. People, you should say they are suspects. Nobody's proved they've done this, but they are the suspects. And they've both been arrested before. So, what is the disconnect?
Yeah. That's a great question. What is the reason why? It's not that the government doesn't know who they were. In fact, in 1998, Netanyahu was asked about it. He came to the US. At that time, he was prime minister. He was asked about it by Sam Husseini, then working for the ADC.
Well, let me stop you for a second, David.
Yeah.
Because let me just play this short clip. This is Netanyahu's slip of the tongue.
Keith Fuchs and Andy Green are apparently still in Kiryat Arba. And what we've been told, since we're the organization involved in this, is that the Justice Department has not received full cooperation at all from the Israeli government on this matter.
I assure you that our policy is to cooperate fully with the murder.
So yes, he was confronted by Sam Husseini in that press conference. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Just wanted to show our viewers that.
Mm-hmm. So he's confronted, what's happening with the investigation into the murder. So Netanyahu clearly demonstrates that he is familiar with the case, but then when asked about those, tries to play it off like, oh, we sent you someone else. Meanwhile, that was a third suspect that is sitting in a US jail for another unrelated crime. But the two suspects that are out and about and their names are known, and he asks about them. And what does Netanyahu say? Oh, well, you heard it yourself. It's our policy to cooperate with the murderer. And, to me, it sounds like a Freudian slip, because how can he possibly claim he doesn't know who these people are? In fact, that just 2 weeks earlier, that Baruch Ben Yosef, he argued in front of Israel's Supreme Court twice. And then just a few months later, he comes back to Israel's Supreme Court, this time suing Netanyahu himself. He actually files suit against Netanyahu on behalf of who? Jonathan Pollard, another far right-wing American Jewish man who later went to jail for spying on the United States for Israel. So in any case, this is like, insane level of chutzpah to actually, this man hasn't, he's not living in some small town, living a quiet life. He's argued in front of Israel's Supreme Court dozens of times. He has, the longest arrest record for administrative detention, which is used for suspected terrorists.
Right.
In this case, the longest for any Jewish citizen in the state. Mm-hmm.
I just want to turn back to Abed for a minute. Because in terms of what could happen from this country, because with the men we're talking about and the groups they're part of, they are tantamount, in parallel in this country, to people who might be in the Ku Klux Klan, or people might be in white nationalist movements. That's their kind of comparative organizations in this country, I think. But to talk about what legally can be done can this be opened up in Congress, but do an investigation and find out why the FBI is not pushing this? I know the FBI now has it, not the Santa Ana police. So what do you think the alternatives are?
Well, right now it's important to keep note that it isn't an open investigation by the FBI. So anytime we try to obtain answers or clarity on issues or an explanation as to why there's been no movement, why no charges brought, their excuse is always, well, this is an open investigation, we can't comment. What we would like to see, that the priority would be to bring charges against these individuals, make it clear that we acknowledge who's responsible, we know who committed this assassination, and move towards the second and third phase, which is the extradition to the U.S. But before we're even able to get to that point, they haven't officially charged these individuals. They haven't even named them publicly. We would like to see the FBI to move on that. On the second track, which you brought up, the congressional oversight, that is a possibility. That did happen shortly after the murder. There were hearings held in Congress about the murder, about the FBI investigation. And throughout the years, there has been pressure from elected officials. But as I said, the past few years, it has quieted down a little bit. You know, there was a hopelessness that this thing is not moving. But now with the article, with the new information out there, with refreshing a lot of the information that's been out there, we are hopeful that there will be some congressional members in the near future that will put pressure on the FBI for clarity. Will bring some oversight and some a look into why this investigation is taking so long, why they haven't moved on naming individuals and suspects, and why they're not holding taking into value the life of a Palestinian, the life of a U.S. citizen. So it really is something that's going to require a lot of work and a lot of public pressure. But first and foremost, outside of the congressional work and everything, we do need to see the FBI and the DOJ bring these charges forward. As David mentioned, there is an individual here in the U.S., Robert Manning, who is sitting in a jail cell. We know is responsible for this. Bring charges against him. Bring charges against these two other individuals in Israel, and then let us work towards the extradition and all that other stuff afterwards. But at minimal, bring the charges so we can begin the process of bringing justice for Alex Ode and his family.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that maybe Lou Correa, who's a congressman from Santa Ana, and others, the more progressive members in Congress, could actually bring this up in the Judiciary Committee and do an investigation and find out why this is not being pushed, and push the FBI to bring some answers to the fore, which is why I hope this is going to be the result of the work you've done, David Sheen, and broadcasts like this, kind of pushing the issue to put it out there so it just cannot be ignored any longer. David, do you have a final thought?
Well, I'll just say this much. The ideology of this group, the Kahana group, what they want is not only to ethnically cleanse Israel and the Palestinian territories and beyond, they also want to create a theocracy. And this is what and they want to destroy the Muslim mosques on top in the old city of Jerusalem and to create a Jewish temple there, to turn it into a monarchy, you know? So this really should be a movement that is, as you mentioned, analogous to neo-Nazism. And in fact, an Israeli court decreed as such some years ago. Yep. We've come so far now that, the far right is in vogue and everything is inverted all over again. But I think it's important that we remember this. We're talking about as people who aspire to genocide, to commit genocide. That's a theology of the group. And that means that everyone who considers himself not even fighting for Palestinian rights, which is also important, but even people who think of themselves as liberals, who just believe in the most basic, we want to see a democracy of any nature. They need to step up and stand up to oppose the Kahanist movement, whether it's the alleged assassins of 35 years ago or the protege of one of said alleged assassins, who is now the leader of the Jewish Power Party that Netanyahu is bringing into the parliament, into his next government.
These are very important points. And Abed, very quick closing thought, if you have one.
We're going to keep pursuing justice. This case will continue to be a priority for ADC and the Arab American community, and we encourage the work of David and others to bring this information forward. And we encourage the FBI and DOJ to do the right thing and begin the process of bringing justice for Alex and his family.
And the Real News will do its part as well. We just heard Abed Ayoub, who is the Legal and Policy Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and of course David Sheen, who wrote the article in The Intercept, noted journalist, joins us as well to talk about his piece and pushing this case, which we will try to stay on top of as well. And thank you all for joining us. Let us know what you think. David and Abed, thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
And I'm Mark Steiner here with the Real News Network. Let us know what you think about this. We're going to keep pushing this idea. Take care.